Thank you everybody for coming. My name is Emily Quirk. I'm the editor of the Extra newsletter. And tonight we have a forum introducing you to the candidates for House District 19 on the Republican side. It's the only contested race in the primary that we have in this district. So we've welcomed the candidates here tonight, which include Tim Copeland, Joanne Ward, and Patrick Abrami. Everyone's got a name tag here so you can identify your candidates. The newsletter prides itself in being a hometown paper, and I hope that these types of forums that we host help voters become more informed as they go to the polls. So I hope that you find that this evening is helpful to you and helps you get to know the candidates prior to Tuesday, because that's just a few days away. I'll go over the format of tonight's forum, and then we'll get started and ask the candidates some questions. Each candidate will be given an opportunity to have a 5-minute opening statement, and then after that we'll open it up to questions and answers. I brought a ton of questions, but I don't want to take away from what the public wants to ask these candidates. So we can certainly rotate. The public can ask a question and I can ask a question, or if there's an overwhelming number of people in the public with questions, I will take a back seat to asking mine. But definitely want to get everybody involved, and don't be afraid to come to the mic and ask your question. We hope that when you come to the mic that you state your name and your address for the record and direct the question to either one candidate or all the candidates. Just be specific as to who you're directing the question to. And we're going to ask each candidate to limit their response to 3 minutes. If the question is for each candidate can get 3 minutes to answer. If it's directed at one candidate specifically, the other two opponents can have a 1-minute rebuttal. If they so choose. So hopefully that's a fair way to do things this evening. And then about 8:45 or whenever we're done asking our questions, we can move to have the candidates do a 5-minute closing statement and end our evening. So tonight's debate, tonight's forum will be on Seacoast Online. We have a reporter, Aaron Davis, here who covers the town of Stratham for us. So he will be writing the story out of tonight's forum, and we'll be posting that on Seacoast Online later this evening, and it'll be in the newsletter on Friday. So please look to that in case you want further details from tonight's forum. And I also just want to remind everybody that voting in Stratham is from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, September 11th, here at the Municipal Center. So we hope that you come and vote at that time. I will start things off, and we'll start at the end of the table at Tim, going out. Oh, no, Pat.
Well,
you're in alphabetical order.
We're out of order.
Well, why don't we start with you, and we'll go down the line then with the opening statements. How's that sound?
Okay, I'll try.
And then closing, we'll do opposite.
Okay. I'll try this with a microphone in the back. Please let me know. Raise your hand if you can hear. I'll go to the microphone. First, I want to thank the Exeter Newsletter, and it's my understanding it's also sponsored by the Greater Federation of Women's Clubs. I want to thank them as well. Thank Emily for moderating, and for Aaron to be here, and for Howard to also be here. I heard you're a timekeeper.
I'm the timekeeper.
It's an honor. It's been an honor to represent all of you in Stratham these past 2 years. Some of you know that I've been a resident of Stratham for 29 years. I live 2 blocks away in Tall Pines Drive. I raised my family here. They're grown, they're out of college and on their own now. But during those early years, I was very active in the community. Boy Scouts, for instance. My son became an Eagle in this town, Troop 185. I coached all the various sports, girls and boys soccer, softball, baseball, and girls basketball. Matter of fact, I was the one who started a league for girls basketball in this town, and that ended in a tournament every year for kids through 3, 4, and 5th grade. Really learned the importance of volunteerism in a town like this, and it's something that we all should be pride ourselves in the volunteerism of our town. My education, I've got a bachelor and a master's degree from the University of Buffalo in Industrial Engineering Operations Research. I've University of Buffalo is the mothership of the State University of New York system. I was one of the side things is I was the founding father of the University of Buffalo Lacrosse Club. It still exists today. The dean of the engineering school there has reached out in the last couple of years and found me, and he asked me to chair a committee on, it's the Industrial Systems Engineering Advisory Council. There's eight folks from around the country that we meet with the faculty and the chairman of the department to really review the relevance of the curriculum that's being taught for guys out there in the field using the techniques. Having gone to a state university, I understand the importance of our New Hampshire State University system. For work, I still have a day job. I'm one of 4 partners in a firm, Applied Management Systems, and even with that, I've consulted for 38 years in 400 hospitals. We consult in hospitals, and when we're in session, January to June, I'm at the State House all the time. I never miss. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. I'm there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we vote on bills on Wednesdays, and I never miss. And I've come to be known by both Democrats and Republicans as the healthcare guy. I get people come to me all the time asking me for, up in Concord, for advice on healthcare issues. Now, when I ran 2 years ago, I said there were 3 ticking time bombs in the state. One was the $800 million budget gap. Now, the Democrats are saying that, thank you, that budget gap didn't exist. It existed, and if we want to spend some more time later, we'll talk about that. It was a very tough budget. We were able to balance the budget. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. Our revenue estimates were right on the money, and it was a tough budget, but we did balance it. The unfunded pension liability. We were ranked 15th worst of any state in the country, percentage-wise, in our unfunded liability. Again, that was tough, but we came up with a fair solution to that funding problem, and even the Seacoast papers said we did the right thing when we were done. And then the other time bomb that I saw out there was the impending Obamacare and what it meant to Medicaid costs. Now, we did do Medicaid reform in the state this past year, and we've shifted from a fee-for-service program to a managed care program, and it's been we're rolling it out as we speak. So we're going to save tens of millions of dollars there, but we also think that it'll be better quality for the patients because they'll have a doctor assigned to them. Now, the issue of Obamacare is going to be, and what the Supreme Court's ruled is that the feds cannot force the states to expand the coverage of Medicaid to 133% of poverty level. That's going to be a big issue for next year. I'm a very active rep, Ways and Means. I've chaired many subcommittees on the floor. I'm always fighting. Most recently, I fought for a bill on prescription controlled substances monitoring system. Right in the middle of the debate, I was the last speaker that day. There was a tabling motion, and after that we won that tabling motion. I had to come back, and we only won by 10 votes. And I came back and was able to pull that out. We picked up another 20 votes. Very active, and I have a lot more to say, but we'll say it as time goes on here. Thank you very much.
I've lived in Stratham for 25 years. I moved from Rhode Island before that. My husband David and I have been married for 38 years. We raised 2 children. They started their schooling here in Stratham and then wound up at St. Thomas. My older daughter teaches college, and my younger daughter is working in the SAU as a speech therapy assistant. It's been a humbling and privilege to serve the state of New Hampshire as a state representative these last year and a half. As I travel around, people are astonished that we have the government for the people, and after they say there's 400 of you, to really believe what the system is like and what serving in our house is like. I've been very active as well in the State House in the last couple of years. I was on the Labor Committee initially, still am, and then I was about a year into it asked if I was still interested in being on Health and Human Services, so I was on both committees. Also, I was on the Business Coalition as a link to the Labor Committee, and that group was looking for ways of helping businesses to improve their bottom line and encourage small businesses to grow. So that was a very rewarding experience. On Health and Human Services, I was a member on 2 subcommittees to look at prescription drug monitoring and to look at the doctor shopping for prescription narcotics. So I've success on that one. We did pass legislation to enable doctors to keep a better monitoring eye on people who are shopping around just for the narcotics. And some of them say you're helping, by passing this, you're helping to save lives. I've had 37 years in healthcare experience, and I find that bringing that to the table on the Health and Human Services Committee, when I'm listening to bills or getting involved with how to work with legislation, has been helpful. And sometimes something might seem like it's a fix for a problem, but it isn't always that way once you start looking at it. On the Labor Committee, we did several things. Again, working with businesses to, I have a cousin who owns his own business and said, get the Department of Labor off my back. And when he heard I was on the Labor Committee, and then as I was exploring what he meant and listening to bills, it seemed that people were being fined when the Department of Labor would go in and find something, and now they're being warned before they're being fined. So that is one change that we did make. Also, I had no clue what right to work was prior to being a member of the Labor Committee, and discovered that right to work isn't anti-union as believed, but honestly the emails and the correspondence I received was from people who were saying, I'm at the bottom of the pay scale, I'm starting out in a new job, and I'm a whatever, but I don't make a lot of money, and I resent paying those access fees. So through testimony, etc., I support right to work. I believe that with the healthcare initiatives, my background would help me in another term. I do not want to be a career politician, but I set out to help make changes for Obama to prepare for the Affordable Care Act. And when that got put on hold, it got put on hold and put us on hold as far as progressing forward. So I would like another opportunity to see that through. And I thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Copeland, and again, I also thank the Greater Federation of Women's Club of Exeter and the Exeter Newsletter for hosting this. A lot of you know me. I've been your town selectman here for 4.5 years. I started out on the Zoning Board of Adjustment 6 years ago, I guess it was. Then went into the Board of Selectmen. I also serve as a member of the Stratham Volunteer Fire Department, the Recreation Commission, and the Conservation Commission. And I'm proud to serve on those, so as you can see, I'm very, very active in this town, and I enjoy the town very much. I've been here for 10 years. I've been married to my wife for 25 years tomorrow. And I was on the Municipal and Government Committee. By being on that committee, it helped a lot with my municipal knowledge that I gained here in the 4.5 years as a selectman. And I was able to bring that knowledge to the table in the municipal and county government. There was numerous pieces of legislation in the last 2 years, probably close to 2,000. A lot of it went through our committee. It seemed like we met all the time, but it was busy. There were a lot of changes trying to be made throughout the state on municipal, county, and city government. Some of it was very frivolous, some of it was issues with the towns themselves that made mistakes and they wanted the legislature to try to correct it. But during all that, my point is that I was able to stop, which was my mission, a lot of the downshifting that went on what they call unfunded mandates that people would put on us, the selectmen, to be passed on to you as the taxpayer. So my job, the way I saw it, was to make sure that whatever was coming down the pike that was going to be passed on to the floor was properly vetted and was justified in nature, cost-wise and restriction and regulation-wise. I was a primary sponsor of a key piece of legislation that's now become law regarding mosquito spraying on state-owned land. David Canada here helped me with that. We had issues 2 years ago where Fish and Game wouldn't let us spray on the marshes over there with the larvicide to kill the mosquitoes before they become airborne. And they had to wait for Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services had to wait for the governor to declare a state of an emergency, and the two departments weren't talking with one another. So at one point, they lost the documentation for about 30 days. A couple of mosquito pools had hatched by that time. So we saw a hole in the system that needed to be corrected. So I jumped into that. I worked hard to get the mosquito legislation through, all the different pieces and positions that you had to get in order for the governor to sign it. As you know, we're back to the West Nile virus and the Eastern equine encephalitis viruses. Right in Exeter, they just found one. So I think it's good for Stratham. So I got the legislation through. The only thing they did was I had a 5-year window on it. They made it actually a 1-year window. I went to the Senate and we changed it to 3 years, and that's where it is now. So it's good for 3 years every time the governor declares a state of emergency. It's wide open for all the townships at their cost to spray without asking permission from the state. So I'm very proud of that. My personal philosophy and what I've carried the last 2 years and will continue in the next 2 years is that I definitely believe in responsibility, accountability, integrity, honor, respect, and fiscal responsibility. Your elected officials need to hold themselves to a much higher standard in their duty and conduct than the average citizen. The public should demand these things from their elected representatives. After all, you have entrusted these people to deliver and represent your message. As a believer in the phrase, actions speak louder than words, I believe that I've delivered that message in Concord for my constituents. I have always put the people in the district first and foremost over party and party leadership, the ones who elected me and put me in office. This has been my platform for the last term, and I hope to continue with the political philosophy into the next. I will continue to hold myself to a much higher standard and duty to everybody. So please continue to allow me to be the rational, calm voice in Concord. Allow me to look at the bigger picture, which I do in legislation, so that it won't cost you money, and the productive gain of the greater good of the people, so that can be properly evaluated as time goes on with each piece of legislation. So thank you very much for allowing me the last 2 years. I hope to give you another 2 years. Thank you.
Opening statements, I appreciate that. I would love to open it up to members of the public to come up and ask any questions that they may have. If there's anybody who's shy out of the gate, doesn't want to be the first one at the mic, I have plenty to ask, but I want to open it up to you because it's your forum. So if anybody wants to raise their hand and come to the mic for a question, please do so. I will ask the first question. Let's start on my direct left here with Pat. And you had told Aaron in one of our Exeter newsletter pieces recently that you really want to get state spending back on track and balance the budget, as you had referenced that you helped do this past session. If revenues increase as the economy recovers, what do you feel, or do you feel that additional cuts will still need to be made, and where would you be making those cuts?
No, if revenues come back, I think we'll be funding some of the things that were tough cuts. And there were many tough cuts that occurred. Let me give you an example of, during the process of this year, we discovered that there was a bit of a surplus that we didn't know about. And right in the middle of the session, we voted in, we added back in $1.5 million for the developmentally disabled waitlist fund. So we were sensitive, we are sensitive to some of these things that need it. I mean, the university system was probably cut the hardest, and I have had 2 occasions met with President Huddleston at UNH, along with other reps, and we've had very frank discussions. I think we have to come and meet the university system halfway in terms of productivity of the university as well as funding of the university. And you know, I mentioned in my opening comments about the University of Buffalo experience, and I've got to know that faculty pretty well. And I was really shocked to hear that in the old days the faculty would teach at least 2 courses a semester. Now at the University of Buffalo they teach 1 course 1 year and 2 courses the next. I asked President Huddleston about this, And he says, well, it's pretty similar here at UNH. And I said, geez, you know, it's one thing if a faculty member is bringing in all sorts of grant money and is really productive. But I think just because there are cuts doesn't mean that some of them weren't warranted. And that, but did we cut too much? Probably so, and we need to add back there. And probably some of the other social programs. Although I would remind everybody that we still fund our HHS departments at $2 billion a year. And that the cuts weren't as deep. There were some programs, absolutely, we have to add some money back, but look, I work in hospitals, and there's nothing more sensitive than patient care. And I go to hospitals all the time, and who say that they're running lean and mean, and they're not running lean and mean. We go through and we improve their productivity. I come back in a year or two, and guess what? The sky hasn't fallen. They can indeed run more efficiently and more productively. And that's what the balance that I'm trying to find here. That, you know, we have to have respect for the taxpayer, as well as make sure we're meeting the basic needs of the state. And this was the toughest year the state, 2 years that the state's ever had in terms of balancing a budget. Revenues so far this new fiscal year are tracking ahead of budget. So I think we might be able to have some relief on the way. Thank you.
Of rebuttal or 1 minute response that they'd like to give in response to what Pat said. You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I wasn't thinking in terms of doing that as he was speaking.
Sure.
I'm good.
Oh, you're good? Okay. Anybody from the public have a question on this topic or any other topic that they wanted to ask?
Somebody's got it, right? Hi, I'm Carol Hayescamp. I'm from Dumbarton Oaks in Stratham. And first I want to thank all three of you for serving our community for this last term. But I especially want to thank Mr. Copeland. And the reason being is I feel that he's always taken the time with me to discuss an issue, even if our viewpoints are generally very different. But it's still encouraging to know that we can have a worthwhile discussion. I can't say the same for your two opponents, unfortunately. I did have one opportunity to talk to Mr. Abrami once about a particular vote. I left numerous messages a number of times with Joanne Ward with no return phone call, and that was very upsetting to know that I, reached out and didn't have a return phone call. My question is, if you're not available to talk to voters, especially ones with a different viewpoint of yours, even though you're there to support your constituents and not follow the agenda, as I've found this entire term of Mr. O'Brien, why would we want to send you back to Concord to support Mr. O'Brien's agenda as opposed to the voters who put you into office?
Is that for anyone?
That's,
Yes.
well, especially for the two who...
Well, all I know is I respond to every one of the calls I get and to the emails. We get at the House, we get about 70 emails a day in the House email. I will respond to everybody that's in my district, because you can't respond to all 70. We get emails from the North Country on the speed limit on Lake Winnipesaukee, and no one cares down here about that. But I do respond. Now, we don't have staff. We are who we are up there. We don't have secretaries or staff. We don't have an office. We have a seat in the House, and that's what we have. So I know I make an attempt all the time too. And matter of fact, I get especially the voicemails that I get, I respond to. I'll give you one early part of the session 2 years ago. I got an email from they were repaving one Bunker Hill right out here, and they stopped they did the roughing, and the constituent that lives on Bunker Hill wanted to know. He emailed me and Dave Canada and said, what's going on? Aren't they going to finish this repaving? So I knew it was a state road. Dave emailed me, said, it's your issue, Pat. I got a hold of the engineer. I researched who the engineer was. I got a hold of the engineer of our district. I found out for the constituent that they were going to start repaving. They were going to finish the repaving the following summer. and that really satisfied the constituent, that's all he wanted to know. But believe me, I mean, Herb Moyers just calls me all the time, emails me all the time, and we are definitely on different ends of the spectrum in terms of our beliefs, but I will...
What about Mr. O'Brien's agenda?
Oh, I didn't know that was the question.
Mostly.
Well,
That might take another 3 minutes.
yeah, I don't know, I'm going to stop there, I'll let somebody else address that, and if there's time, I'll come back and I'll address that. If there's another question about Bill O'Brien, I'll address that.
I certainly had a question about civility in the State House, and I'm sure other people might, because that's been a statewide issue, but nothing that can cover in 3 minutes, so we'll ask that at another time. I think that's a good idea.
I apologize if I did not return your call. I don't know that I understood. I get messages that say, call me back if you have the time kind of thing. And so it depends on where in the week it falls. Is regarding O'Brien's agenda, if you look at my voting record, I don't have a House Republican Alliance rating of 100, so I don't always vote with the leadership. And I personally have not had any experience with an agenda being thrust upon me in the State House, and I have not experienced any negative. I would say that the former Speaker of the House, whenever I have had opportunity to see her go up to the well, I believe she's going for somebody's jugular in comparison, and I have not witnessed that from the current Speaker.
To keep on that topic, I think I would like to ask each of you, along those lines, civility in the State House, or a lot of Mr. O'Brien's leadership has been called into question by a number of constituents and the media. Is that something that concerns you? I mean, he's running for, or says he intends to run for Speaker again. Would you support him? Why or why not? And we can each... Yeah, let's give Tim a chance to start.
Thanks.
And we can come back down this way.
I would never support him. I think he's out of his mind. I think he's a bully. He runs the House like a dictatorship. It's the discourse up there was tremendous. The hostility was great. He was uncomfortable 2 years there. I think that we need somebody that is willing to reach across both sides of the aisle to move any agenda forward so that it could be positive for the state. I find that Mr. O'Brien had no integrity. I found that, well, look, I worked for leadership when I first got there, and I saw the handwriting on the wall and what was going on, and the smoke and mirrors and the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, and I resigned the leadership position because I saw what was going on, and I saw it was deplorable and despicable, and I didn't want any part of it. I worked for the people. I pride myself on working for the people. The Speaker and I had different philosophies. His philosophy, which he told me, was party first, leadership second, people are third. I said the people are first. I said I look at some things on the party platform. I don't agree with everything on that platform, and I consider what leadership has to say. So we had a completely different philosophical reasoning, if you will, on how you should be a representative. So no, I would never support him.
I would like to, the Speaker was not my first choice. I did not personally have any difficulty with leadership. I served as a freshman class liaison to leadership. I was never bullied. I was never questioned. I was on 2 committees. I served on 2 committees. I was on the Business Coalition. I never experienced any negative or hostility or this is the way it is. I did not always vote with leadership. Would I support him? I would like to see who the candidates are before I committed to anyone for Speaker. So who knows if he's going to be reelected and what the crop of potential candidates would be.
Okay. I guess I'm the tie-breaking vote here. You know, I sit back and I look, you talk civility, the House has civility. Believe it or not. Let's keep O'Brien out of the equation for a moment. The respect for each other on the floor is a must. We're not allowed to boo, we're not allowed to clap, we're not allowed to disparage a fellow member, we're not allowed to be negative anyway. And if you are, you're gaveled down. You learn quickly that we respect. This is not the British Parliament. And there's a certain level of decorum that is always maintained on the floor. There's always, thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you're asking a member, when there's a debate and you're asking another member a question, you thank that member. There's decorum. I had a thing in the Exeter newsletter about prayer in the House and some of the nice traditions of the House. There are nice traditions in the House, okay? Now, committees, same thing. Ways and Means, we were taught when we first walked in the door. Anybody who comes up and is brave enough to testify before a committee, you treat them with respect. And we treat our guests with respect at the House. We do. And there's always, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for testifying, sir. Those kind of things, and that is the House. Now, O'Brien, he's got his own style. He's Theory X, no question. I've consulted in 400 hospitals, 400 organizations, and I've seen all kinds of players. So I probably have a thicker skin than most to different styles. I think he tells himself okay on the floor because any member on the floor, we're equals on the floor. All of us are equals on the floor of that House. Anybody can rise at any moment and challenge the Speaker to any decision that he makes. And that's the way it works, okay? So, and that's happened a few times. But the thing is, we have Karen Wordsworth, who's the best parliamentarian around, who, when O'Brien gets a little confusing, it does get a little confusing sometimes, motions, and most days it's boring. Some days it gets pretty interesting when there's motions upon motions, and Wordsworth knows what motion comes first, and he refers to her. But I didn't vote for O'Brien the first time. It was a secret ballot, I'll let you know. I reached out to seasoned legislators, reps, to ask, including Doug Scammon, and he suggested against it, and I did not vote for him. I guess my nature is I get along with everybody, anybody's style. The only time I saw negative out of O'Brien is in the Rules Committee that I had to go to a couple times, where I did see him he was gruff, no question, he was short. I never really seen him be short on the floor. But in some of these committees behind the scenes, and probably Tim, the stuff you saw, I'm not saying that you didn't see it, I'm sure you did. And would I vote for him again? Again, like Joanne, it depends on who the other candidates are. If there's another good candidate, I might not vote for O'Brien. Because from my perspective, perception is everything. And he's already done damage to the party, and we can't have that going forward. So,
Very good to know. Any other questions to follow, John?
This conversation that's going on here now and the questions pertaining to the Speaker, and Pat, you made mention of Doug Scammon, and I had the privilege of observing firsthand how Doug conducted himself back in 1990 when I was helping him with his run for Congress. I sat up in that office day after day, in the office, outside the office, watching different people come into that office, and both Republican and Democrat. And there was a fantastic stream of communication that occurred and great civility. And then Doug stepped away from the House for a while. Then Doug went back. And then he, all of a sudden, because there was some controversy on both sides of the aisle up there, Doug had the appeal to be able to reach out to both sides, and they made him Speaker of the House again. So there's a lot to be learned by the conduct of that man and how he conducted himself up there in that capacity. And it would be wise for anyone who is anticipating trying to get votes for that job to reach out and speak to that man and get his philosophy and watch him, as I did.
Well, I agree, and that's why I reached out to someone like Doug, because he dealt with, there were 4 candidates on the Republican side for Speaker. And I did reach out to other seasoned representatives as well about this. Plus, I emailed both, the 2 leading candidates were Chandler and O'Brien. I reached out to both of them by email. I got a response from Chandler, but not from O'Brien. That kind of sealed the fate, too. But I'm a guy of civility, okay? I just understand. I get along with everybody. When I do things in the House, I reach out to everybody. And on this one bill I mentioned about the drug, narcotic reporting system, I got more emails and voicemails on at my home from Democrats thanking me for what I did. And so I know how to be civil. We have a leader we just have to deal with. And you know, as I tell people now, he has to make it through Mount Vernon. He has to get reelected in Mount Vernon before he can run for Speaker. So.
Anybody else? Sure.
Pat paints one picture. I can tell you that one experience I had dealing with the Speaker was an eye-opener. He would, what I call, stack the cards. If someone was sick or out, he would get Republicans to come in and sit in that seat, and he would tell them how he wanted the vote to go. And they were kind of like the yes people to what he wanted done. One day, they called me, which they'll never do again, and said, are you available to sit in finance for Rep. Quan? Because his wife was having some major surgery. So I said, sure. It would be a unique experience sitting in finance. So I went and reported in the morning to the chairman over there, and he said, you look a little apprehensive. And I said, I am. I said, I don't like coming into anything at a late juncture without knowing all the material. We were voting, and we had commissioners coming in on their budgets. And he said, don't worry about it. When I raise my hand yes, you raise your hand yes. It's very simple. And I said, I don't do that. So I sat in Rep. Quant's seat, and I lasted less than an hour, and 2 commissioners later, and the Speaker came down and removed me from that committee because I wasn't voting the way he wanted. So that'll just give you a flavor of what was going on up there directly. I mean, without throwing sugar on anything.
Can we make this into a debate, please?
Right.
If you want to respond, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Okay. There are certain traditions of the House, and whenever a committee's executing bills, and there's seats empty, both parties have the opportunity to fill the seat with another representative. And that's the way it's always been. Lee, you can chime in if this is right. You've been there a long time. And this tradition is that what exactly you said, Tim, is that the rule usually is, and Democrats do this as well, is that you follow the lead of the chairman of that committee. If you're a substitute, you're voting for the party. You're not voting your own vote. That's well known. I've seen Democrats come in and do the same thing. That is the tradition. And I guess no one told you that before you went that first time. But I know in Ways and Means, when we get a Democrat in, they confer with Susan Almy and the Ways and Means, and they're voting with Susan. And when we get a Republican in as a substitute, they're voting with Stefanik. That's just the way it works. And I don't think it's anything of incivility or anything like that. That's just the way the process works.
Can I respond to that?
You have a 1-minute rebuttal.
All right. I was told how it works. I'm just not a puppet for a party. I work for the people, and that's what counts to me. I'm not there to say yes to something that I don't agree with. I just wanted to respond to that.
Thank you. You want to come to the mic?
Being here tonight, this is a little bittersweet because it's
Who are you?
Lee Kwok from Exeter, and I'm glad that I'm not here as a candidate. But look at the upside, Tim, is you can still put it on your resume. You're on finance. One question for Mr. Copeland, Representative Copeland. You witnessed a nasty verbal attack on an elderly female state rep in the Senate chambers. You stood by her. You co-sponsored a bill to stop these types of attacks. There were plenty of witnesses. No question it happened. I followed the process. And you co-sponsored the anti-bullying bill. Right now, you're being attacked by a group that the Speaker has affiliated himself with quite strongly, the Free Staters. And they're nasty attacks, and they're going basically mailbox to mailbox in Stratham. Just to give you an idea, I heard they're going to do it again this Saturday. They're bringing in some out-of-towners. Do you think that this is retribution for you standing up for to the Speaker and sticking by Susan Emerson?
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
I think that's a part of it. I think it's a part of, I didn't fall in line the numerous times you told me to. And we had this philosophical difference of the party versus the people. I think it's all connected. I think that the fact that I consider myself an independent Republican in that I look out for the people first in every piece of legislation, that's how I viewed it. And if it wasn't in line with the rest of the Republican majority that's there, then yeah. I wasn't towing the mark for him. And I wouldn't toe the mark for him. I wouldn't toe it for anybody. I'm here for all these people here because that's who put me in office. That's who I represent. That's who I have to answer to.
Thank you.
I've talked to Tim about this, and I think it's horrible that the mailings that are going out, they're not even mailings, they're just in the slots and in the things. But I want to let you know that I also, I know that Joanne mentioned this, that there are many bills that I voted against the party as well. There's a way of doing it though, okay? There was the cancer hospital bill that O'Brien wanted badly, and I said, well, let the cancer hospitals come in and go through the certificate of need process like everybody else if they got a product that's good. Then there was the certificate of need program itself. They wanted to do away with it, and I'm a healthcare guy, and I know what that means. I've been to states that have repealed their certificate of need laws, and it's Wild West. It's inefficiency in the system. Not only did I vote against those, I testified. These were bills with his name on it, and one of those bills was he was the lead sponsor of the bill. And I testified in HHS, both in the House and the Senate, against him. But I didn't get any retribution. I was waiting, but he didn't come and slam my head and say, Pat, why did you vote that way? I voted my conscience, and there was many other bills that I voted my conscience as well. So let's leave it at that.
Thank you.
Mary Smike. I live here in Stratham, and I noticed there are, I don't know how many people here from Stratham or not. Everybody's welcome, I'm sure. But I think what we really need to do is stick to what is a Stratham problem. Now, I get to vote for 2 of these people here, just 2. I'm a Republican, and we don't get to vote for 3. Right? Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So what we're supposed to do is narrow it down to 2 so that we can go to the polls and vote for 2. Well, I know Pat, I know Joanne, and they're just above. I'm not used to getting, I'd rather write a letter.
Please
But they've done some wonderful things, and I don't think they're getting their full exposure. All this argument about the leadership in Concord. I think that what we have to do is think about who we're going to have represent us in Stratham. And I know who I am, and I don't know how many people are here from Stratham. Oh, good. About half and half, huh?
More than that, a little more.
More than half? That's good. So, anyway, we pick and choose, and I would love to have us just stick more to the Stratham things.
Did you want to ask our candidates any questions that?
No, I wanted to make a speech.
Okay.
Oh, I did have some, because I've been receiving literature on taxpayers, National and Rockingham County, and how the people have voted. Pat and Joanne have both voted. They didn't send in a why or no response. But two of them came in from Tim with no response. Now, I don't know.
I'm unclear on what you mean. There was a survey put out to the candidates and they
Yeah.
responded?
Mhm.
Okay.
So
And it was
anyway,
specific to taxation?
taxation.
What specifically was?
Oh, I should go and get it. I didn't bring it up here with me. There are quite a few subjects involved with taxation.
Can we pose a question perhaps on that to the candidates so that we can all get their take?
Sure.
What specifically on taxation concerns you that you'd like to hear each of them speak on?
I just would like to see where they vote on most things. And this was a good response on all kinds of different subjects. Again, right to work. Would they vote to increase the tax to cover a shortfall? Which I just can't go along with. Better to cut a budget. But then I'm pretty conservative.
Well, why don't we pose the question on right to work, since you bring that up, and we can go through
Good.
each candidate and how they voted this past term and how they would vote, but why. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, right to work. Let's make sure we understand what the right to work bill is about. You don't have to belong to a union in New Hampshire if you don't want to belong to a union. It's all about paying agency fees, which is about 80% of dues. So that's what we're talking about here. There were 22 states in the country, now 23. Indiana became the 23rd that are right to work states. I think there's a role for unions in this country. There have been a good check on balance over the years. But who's checking the unions? And I think that right to work gives the ability to a worker to say, I want to have a relationship with my employer and not with my union. I think that's very strong, okay? I had a dad who was a carpenter union for years. And it was good. The trade unions are pretty good. He was in mid-50s. He said, you know, these winters are getting long, and he went to work for the telephone company, and he was made to join the Communication Workers of America. And you realize that he was a member of the Communication Workers of America for a couple of years, and he goes, my God, what a Mickey Mouse union this is. And this is from a strong union guy. He also worked in a permit with the iron workers. I mean, he's a real union guy. He said the work rules were unbelievable. He said, talk about decreasing productivity. He said there's nothing in these work rules that make any sense to him. The union was giving his dues money to organizations he didn't believe in. Right to work is about guys like my dad, who was really a union guy, but belonged to a union that he really didn't want to belong to. And he'd rather negotiate with his own employer and have a relationship with his own employer. Now, if the union's good, they'll keep their members happy. Again, I think there's a place for unions in this country, no question, because we need the check and the balance. Life is about checks and balances. But I must say, when you look around the country, there are many examples of where unions have gone awry. And I'll give you one last story. A neighbor of mine had a chance to visit in Maine, one of the old paper mills that's closed. And he ran into some of the old timers, the old union guys. And he said, well, geez, what happened up here? They said, 6 men and a wrench. 6 men and a wrench. What does that mean? That means that the old work rules were, they had to fix that thing over there, it took 6 men and 1 wrench. And that's where unions have gone. You gotta understand it, we need to bring it back to reasonable rules. And I think a good check is for the members to have more say by being able to opt out of the union and not have to pay agency fees. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I voted, obviously, I voted for right to work when it came through.
Thank you. Jimmy?
As I mentioned earlier, I also support right to work. When I went to the House, I really didn't know what it meant. Being on the Labor Committee and listening to all, 400 people that came to testify. And again, the chairman of the committee allows, if you've taken the time out of work to come and testify, you have that right to do it. So there were nights that we were there beyond 7 o'clock listening to testimony on and against, for and against right to work. The letters I received and the emails that I received were from people who aren't making tons of money, who resent that their paychecks included that fee towards the unions. And so they were asking to support right to work so that they could have more money in their take-home paycheck. There were other people that asked to support the right to work because they said once they were in the union, their opportunity for advancement was halted. So I've been, a supporter based on what my constituents have been telling me, and I think if that the unions make their case for why people should be in the union and what advantages it is for the union, for them to be in that union, then membership would grow if people decide not to join.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tim?
I am totally against right to work. It makes no sense in this state whatsoever. We don't have it in the Northeast, there's a reason for it. We had it here once in this state in 1947. The legislature voted in right to work. In 1948, they voted it right out. It doesn't make any sense. First of all, the people that you're talking about, the impact is fractional compared to our entire workforce that are in public and private sector unions. It's not so much about the unions. It's about many other things. It's about setting the bar for the wages across the board, which the private sector always looks at the public sector. It's about setting the bar for what the health care is for the private sector and the public sector. It's about safety in the workplace. In the 23 right-to-work states, accidents in the workplace are far greater than the 27. And deaths are higher in the workplace than the others. Why? Because if they're reported, they can be fired. It's easy to get fired. It doesn't make any sense. I did a lot of research on right to work because I too did not know what that term meant. It's a very deceiving term. And I did a lot of research in it, and I put that research in the paper. I've gotten on the House floor and discussed it. But basically, as Pat said, there's 23. One just went to it last year. I disagree with Pat's analogy that 80% are paying these agency shop fees. Naturally, it's more like 50%. But that's to cover their collective bargaining costs. But out of that, let's deal with the reality of right to work. And has it worked? Has it worked in the places that's working, that have it right now, which is mostly down south? The answer is no, compared to New Hampshire. Only 2 states, Wyoming and Virginia, have a higher per capita personal income than New Hampshire. 2, that's it. That leaves 21 that can't even touch New Hampshire. And out of the 23 right-to-work states, only Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota have a lower unemployment rate than our state. And they have a lower per capita income for New Hampshire. Again, why would we want to go backwards on something like this? Why would we want to even entertain something like this in this state? It makes no sense. Even the Commissioner of Labor, he says, I've been the Commissioner of Labor for the last 6 years. I have not met and worked with many, I have met and worked with many business leaders in their various capacities. Not once has a business leader in this state told me they believe right to work should be adopted in the state and that it would work for their business and bring businesses here. It's all rhetoric. It's unfounded rhetoric, not based on facts. And all of you can look this up easily. Just go to the Department of Labor of the United States. It's all right there. All the states that have it, all the states that don't, what New Hampshire's doing, we are far better off without it.
Ray brought up, and it was taxation in general, but specific to this cigarette tax. I understand that it's not bringing in nearly as much as was predicted since they lowered it. And it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there was some sort of clause in this that if it didn't work out, if they weren't making the money back, that the legislature would return it, bring it back up to that rate. And would you do that if elected back into the legislature this session?
Well, this is a Ways and Means issue, so let's just start with me. Let me set the stage of what went on. The cigarette tax went up from 98 cents a pack in 2007 to $1.78 a pack in 2010. New Hampshire prides itself in sin taxes, and we always get border sales, whether it's selling our alcohol, selling our cigarettes, selling our lottery tickets, whatever. When this came up in Ways and Means, it was clear that there had been a drop in revenues from the last year that the Democrats were in control. That last year, the last 2 years, from the second to last year to the last year, the Democrats were in control. Cigarette tax revenues actually dropped $7.7 million. People don't know this. Cigarette revenues dropped during Democratic control 7.7. They increased the tax, but revenues dropped. That happens now and again. Why did the revenue drop? The revenue dropped because we lost border sales, okay? Even the Democrats in Ways and Means agreed that we lost border sales. We had testimony from convenience store chains, from independent convenience stores, saying we're losing all our revenue along the borders, okay? Now, I inoculate myself when I talk about this. I have no idea why anybody smokes. Never have, never will. We on Ways and Means took a little bit of a gamble, and we said, you know, maybe if we reduce this tax a little bit, we'll bring back some of the border sales. And I don't want to hear about the Cancer Society. I told the Cancer Society people, said, if you put a bill on the table that says we'll want to ban cigarettes in this country, I'll sign up for that. It's nothing to do with that. Since we have taxes and since we have these kind of sin taxes, we've got to take a realistic approach to this. And so, our goal was to try to bring back revenues that we lost, okay? It isn't, in the Cancer Society says, well, you're hurting the kids, you know, you're hurting the kids. I'm saying, wait a minute, let's not confuse tax policy and with good parenting, okay? They're independent issues, okay? We were just making an attempt to bring back the revenues by, and we had a debate in Ways and Means that maybe 10 cents wasn't enough of a drop to really bring back that. Now, what's gone on is that the tax has come back a bit, and there is indeed the trigger. And this is a trigger that doesn't need any legislation. At the end of this year, the tax will roll back to the $1.78 from the $1.68 automatically.
End of this calendar year?
End of the fiscal year, right. So we'll take a seat, you know. Even, we had the governor's budget director in a couple of months ago, and they said, you know what he said to us when it came to the cigarette tax? He says, you guys actually took the long view on this. You took the gamble that you bring back those sales. And it hasn't been working out, but I will tell you, Ways and Means revenue estimates for this first year that just ended are right on the money overall, right on the money. And we're going to track well next year as well. So we took a gamble on one, but we won on the whole. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne?
No comment on that. I mean, I think that spoke for what it said. We took a gamble on it, trying to bring back, because I had heard also of many of the stores closing along the border. So it was an attempt to bring back those businesses.
Thank you. Tim?
I initially thought, I questioned this, and I actually spoke to Pat, because Pat, I looked at his knowledge from being in Ways and Means, and I conferred with him on the vote, the day of the vote, because I was on the fence with it. And Pat explained just like he did to you just now, and I listened to Pat, and I did vote for it, and I'm sorry I voted for it. Because it turned out to be, in my opinion, a bit of a sham, this whole thing. The speaker went down, he had met with the tobacco company, unbeknownst to me. Next thing I know, within a few weeks of us doing it, the cigarette companies all increased nationally their cigarettes by 9 cents a pack. Wow, that's interesting. We reduced it 10, they increased it 9. So I'm sorry I voted for that.
But that was a national increase. It wasn't just New Hampshire.
I said it national. I said it
national. You did.
Thank you. Public on this topic or any other topic that you'd like to ask our candidates? Herb?
Herb Moyer, Exeter. When these representatives were in the legislature, they did represent me, so I'm speaking to that point, even though I'm not a Stratham resident. And I wanted to ask a question. Before I do, I wanted to say that in my interactions with all three, 2 of the representatives have been responsive and courteous and have answered my questions, called me, written me, and those are Mr. Abrami and Mr. Copeland. I'd like to know if you voted to support the 2 constitutional amendments that we'll all be voting for in November. If you did, why did you? And do you not see that there's an issue about the separation of powers in allowing the legislature to have partial control over running of the courts? So in November, we'll all vote to embody in the Constitution, whether or not we will do this, to forever ban an income tax in the state. And we'll also vote to allow the legislature to have 50% administrative authority over the court system. How did you vote on those issues? Why? And what do you plan to vote in November?
Let's start at the other end with Tim this time.
Trying to remember. I believe I went with the proposal for the courts because of the Claremont decision and what happened with that, and that the courts had become the legislature. So I wanted to give it back to the people to decide, and I wanted to play out more of the vetting process, if you will, so that more people on both sides would discuss the issues, so that by the time November rolled around, people would be more educated on what the process is, what it would entail, what the results of the legislation would be, so they could properly place the right vote. I believe I voted against the 2/3 tax because I didn't think you needed that many people in a majority to do that, number one. And how do you say no forever to something that you don't know what's going to happen in the future? You just don't know. And there's so many variables out there. And how many cuts do you have to make before you say, do we need another tax? In order to stay in the minimum basis of what you need in the state to survive. I don't know. But it didn't sound good for me.
I voted in favor of both of them. I agree with Tim on the Claremont decision, allowing the courts to have too much decision on how the education funding happens in the state. On the second one, I believe that when you go around the country, we do have our property tax, but our New Hampshire advantage is no sales tax and no income tax. And I do believe that it should be up to the people to decide, not for me to decide. So I think putting it on the ballot in November allows the people of the state to determine whether or not that's something good for us.
Thank you.
Well, I voted for both. I think the second one, Herb, you meant the...
CACR 13 and 26.
Yeah, right. Not the Claremont one, not the Claremont...
Well, 13 is whether or not we will forever ban an income tax in the state.
Right, yes, yes. I voted for that. And again, it's also to put it out to the people. We need 2/3 vote of the people to pass that, okay? You know, and I look at New Hampshire, what I see is a state that's ranked #1 in just about everything. We're ranked 1 in health of its people, education of its students, quality of life. Okay, I see low crime rates. I see many things. And when I use, the beauty of America is that there's 50 different labs out there that are churning away, okay? When I look at other states and I see what they've got and what all these taxes have done to them, it's not a pretty sight, okay? We should count our blessings in this state that we have low taxes and that we have no broad-based taxes. Now let me give you the New Jersey example. Years ago, New Jersey didn't have an income tax. And you know what they said to the people? We need an income tax to lower the property taxes. Well, guess what? New Jersey's got an income tax, and it's got the highest property tax rates in the country right now. It's once you turn the spigot, you got to understand the psychology of this and how government works. Once you open that spigot, it's open forever. And we'll find a way to spend the money. And if you think that money is spent wisely all the time, I say look at the federal government, #1, but in many states, and I've lived in New York, I've lived in New Jersey, I've lived in Maine, I've lived in Massachusetts, and believe me, this is nirvana here in New Hampshire. So on that one. In terms of the one on the court, I also voted for that. There was clearly a need to have more oversight by the legislature of our courts. The courts are running wild out there. They're not managing themselves the way they should, and a little additional oversight of the courts is not a bad thing. We're not talking about Claremont now. We're talking about this other bill. I did vote for the Claremont as well, the Cork 12, but we didn't have enough votes to get to the 60% threshold. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I have plenty more questions for our candidates that I have prepared. I would like to have each of you tell us here today what your thoughts on expanded gambling are. It's very likely that that's going to come up again this next legislature, legislative session, and I'd like to hear what your take on that is. Can we start with Joanne in the middle this time? Yeah, mixing it up a bit.
I do not support expanded gambling. Maine has just expanded their gambling. Massachusetts is planning for 4 casinos. I think we missed the boat on the opportunity for that to bring in substantial revenue. So I know I will not be supporting expanded gambling. Also, when you talk to my mom, lives in Rhode Island, frequents the casinos in nearby Connecticut, and she's saying that they're downsizing, laying off people, so that the revenues aren't there from that perspective from where they were. So I think we missed the boat on that. I don't think there'd be any advantage to it. I know they were talking about in North Country in the Lakes region expanding it, and the devastation it would have on the hotels and the restaurants and the meals tax up in that area, because people would be spending those dollars gambling and not at the establishments that have been there for years.
Tim, and then we'll come back to that.
I agree with some of Joanne's points. I'm also against it. I voted against it. The additional things that it brings that to me doesn't make sense is additional police services, for example. The states that do have it, the state police have a separate subunit that does all the investigations on the gambling side of it and inside the house itself. So we'd have to create another division of the state police and man that with manpower, salaries, benefits. Also, the increase of domestic violence is large, and the addictions of it that we have to pay for. If you look at these cities, if you went and spoke to the police chief in Atlantic City, for example, before Atlantic City went there, and when people used to use it as a vacation place, it was a beautiful place. If you speak to the police chief that came later on, when gambling came in, it became a real crap show. I mean, it was only good for one thing, producing money. And who's going to get rich? Not the state of New Hampshire. We even wanted to sell that away. We wanted to just about give it away to these outside companies for peanuts compared to what they were going to make. No. The only way I would vote for it would be if we had a handle on how we were going to do it, with the additional police services that would be needed, with the domestic violence programs that would have to be put in place, with the addiction issues that would be there, and we would own it. Own the whole thing like we own liquor. We own it all. We don't give any of it away. But we're not doing that.
Thank you.
Well, we got our first unanimous vote tonight. Yeah, I'm on Ways and Means, where this one originates from Ways and Means as well. And let me tell you, that hearing, there was out the door. We had both sides, and it was, talk about, matter of fact, we had to adjourn and come back later on because there were so many people who wanted to testify pro and con on this. And this is probably one of the most bipartisan things. There are Democrats for it and Republicans for it, both sides. There's no partisanship in this issue. And as far as the Seacoast, from my from the constituents here and around town, there was really no great cry to us for casinos here. Now, where I got all my emails and mail from was from Salem, Rockingham Park. The guys from Rockingham Park came to Ways and Means with the blueprints. We're ready to build. Let's go. But I voted against it for a lot of the reasons that were stated. I don't think there's really value added to the state with this. I think we have missed the boat a bit as well. And it will come up again. The old timers tell me it comes up every year, every session. And it'll probably keep on coming up every session. And different versions. You know, this thing blossomed from just 2 casinos when it left Ways and Means, and it came back. Well, the guys in the North Country said, how about us? Next thing we know, we've gone from 2 casinos to 4 in the bill we finally voted on. And then, you know, part of me said, you know, if these are destination casinos, maybe that might be okay, but I still wasn't very, but then when they started going to 4 casinos, I said, these aren't going to be destinations. These are just going to, I tell you, I have a client in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and there's an Indian casino by the airport, and I remember my client saying to me, hey, stop by the casino one day. So one day my flight was delayed. It was right across the street from the airport, so I walked over to the casino, and it was sad. What I saw was sad. I mean, you know the people sitting at those slot machines didn't have the money to be at those slot machines. And so it was clear to me that it's not. As a matter of fact, in the testimony that we heard, one of the most addictive things is slot machines. The studies show they really are addictive. So I'll leave it at that. And I'll vote against it again if it comes up.
Questions from the public? Both Pat and Joanne touched upon this briefly, but want to know a little bit about what you intend to do if reelected into the legislature as we approach Obamacare, and how you intend to move forward. I believe, Joanne, in your opening you said you look to repeal it here in New Hampshire, but want more specifics from each of you on how you feel on that and what is the solution.
So there are different models out there for managing care in medical homes. And today, one of the subcommittees I'm on, we had a speaker from Dartmouth Hitchcock who's using that model. She came to explain to us how that's working and how they anticipate saving beaucoup bucks for Medicare people by having what they call a medical home. So you have a physician group, and there are 5 of them currently in the state. So you have, and they're pilot programs with the federal government. So you have the physician group or the hospital manage the care for all of their participants or people who are enrolled in their program. The patients don't know they're in the program, so the hospitals are rewarded for managing their care if there's a net savings at the end of the year. So it's basically a fee for service. So it's looking at how people can come into these managed care folds and medical homes and be managed and yet save money. without being denied care. So it's to prevent duplication of testing, giving you the surgery you need when you need it rather than delaying it. So they've got certain quality indicators. There's also some feeling that this can be expanded to include Medicaid and create some model for Medicaid that saves money along the same lines with the managed care. Also, there are opportunities with substance abuse issues and psychiatric services where there's some overlap in services provided, and that system is fragmented, and I believe things could be looked at to bring those groups together. In the spring, I was part of substance abuse symposium, and they put us in work groups, and they had the substance abuse, they had the people with psychiatric illnesses, mental illnesses, in the same room, and all they kept saying is, we need more money to provide the services, and they were tasked with how can you work together, where can you overlap, because if someone winds up in the hospital for one issue and the other agency that's working with them doesn't know they're in the hospital for that issue, they're conflicting with the continuity of care that they're getting. So to bring some of these agencies together to try and streamline costs and better patient management.
What was the initial question?
Well, Joanne was talking about some ideas on how to save costs, but I really wanted to know specific to Obamacare, which I think you touched on in your opening statement, but if you would just...
But that's part of it's the Affordable Care Act, and so how do you make healthcare more affordable? So it's looking at different models to try and bring in more of the population into those models.
Okay.
Yeah. There's one big issue that's going to be facing us next year in the House and the Senate. Okay, and I touched on it earlier in my opening remarks. With Obamacare, well, the Supreme Court ruled it's the law of the land. The Supreme Court said it's constitutional. But they did give us a little breathing room, and it said that the feds cannot force the state to expand their Medicaid program, because Obamacare called for, like I said earlier, increasing the eligibility for Medicaid to 133% of federal poverty levels. Now, for the state of New Hampshire, I've seen estimates anywhere from 30,000 to 50,000 additional people on Medicaid. Medicaid. Did I say Medicare before? I meant to say Medicaid. I apologize. It's Medicaid. So that was just a way of getting more people covered. In other words, right now we cover X number of Medicaid lives, and the feds are saying, well, let's have the states do more of this, and we'll increase it. Now, what the Obamacare bill says is that for the first 2 years, that the federal government will pay 100% of that increase. I think year 3 it goes down to 90%. My concern is there's nothing free in this world. Okay, my concern is that there's nothing to say that those rules won't change. There's nothing to say that this looks like a big unfunded mandate coming our way. And this is where we got to be careful as a state, because that 90% could go down to 50%. And if you put 30 or 50,000 more people on Medicaid, they're going to look to the state to pick that up. That's going to be a big problem. So I'm going to be very cautious as this debate goes on next year if I'm there, and just keep on reminding people that, remember that the federal government is bankrupt, okay? The federal government, 40 cents on the dollar is borrowed money. Something is going to give here eventually, and that some of these programs, they're going to look at the states, just as we talk about the state downshifting costs to the towns and the cities. You know, the ticking time bomb for this year, my 3 ticking time bombs is a new ticking time bomb. And that is, and we're hearing all sorts of reports that the federal government eventually going to have to start trimming, because you would believe how much money the state gets from the feds. We get a lot of money from the feds. But as some of these programs, the federal level start being trimmed, it's going to trickle down to the states. And we're going to be faced with, do we cut programs or do we raise taxes? We have to figure this out. So, big caution. This could be a big unfunded mandate. We got to be careful. That's all.
Thank you. Tim?
I have more questions than I have answers with the entire Obamacare. For example, what happens with our Medicaid issues, as Pat touched on? If the numbers are that big, 30,000 to 50,000 after 2020, when we own the entire thing, where the feds aren't contributing to certain percentages anymore, because the percentages go down as the years go on, what's going to happen in New Hampshire then? Who's going to pay for all this? I think we were left at the station and the train was pulling out on one of the biggest parts of the healthcare reform, which is tort reform. That's because all the lawyers were running the program. Tort reform is huge because that's what the doctors are afraid of. So the doctors turn around and you come in to a regular doctor for whatever ailment you have, and it's pretty simple what you have. It's pretty simple to the doctor what you have. But just to be on the safe side now, he's going to order 4, 5, 6, however tests it is, however many it is, to make sure that he didn't miss anything. That drives all the costs up. So that's part of it. The tort reform is huge. Also, there's other glaring holes in the Obamacare. I don't know if a lot of you know it, but if you're self-insured, if your company's big enough, companies like Liberty Mutual, governments, you're not part of the program. You don't have to insure your people. Big hole there. So that's tremendous. There's parts of it that are good, like pre-existing conditions, and they should be put into any other healthcare reform that comes into the future. But I think we need to look at it all. We need to start with the tort reform, which was totally missed. We need to examine that and see what the costs are for all this testing process to make sure that everybody's CYAs, all these doctors, to make sure that nothing bites them and they don't find some other ailment that they're going to get sued on. So I think I have a lot more questions, unfortunately, than I have answers on Obamacare. I mean, I think that Congress does as well when it's 2,000 pages long.
Thank you.
I was just curious to know how you voted relative to the establishment of a pilot program in New Hampshire, the Fed money to help us do is that the name for it? An exchange, yeah. And how you voted for it and why you voted that way. Thank you.
We can start with that.
I voted against it. And basically, that I'm not an advocate of Obamacare. I think it's the Affordable Care Act. There's nothing affordable about it. And so this is before this vote occurred before the Supreme Court ruling. Most of us thought that the Supreme Court was going to rule it down. So we just said we weren't going to do this. So that was the vote that I took on that one.
And mine was the same reasoning. We didn't think the constitutionality of the American Affordable Care Act would hold up. Tim?
I concur with the other two.
Thank you. Specifically, in this last session, you sponsored a bill in regards to preventing state employees from wearing fragrances or something of that nature. I just wonder where
I'm never going to shake that one.
where did that come from? What was
Party
the-
sponsor sitting back
The
there.
sponsor, I'm glad you're here. The one lady in the okay, let's talk about how bills, the origination of bills in New Hampshire. You know, when we first get there, we're told that constituents are important, and we listen to our constituents. And a lot of bills are constituent bills. In other words, someone comes to you. The constituent from Northampton, in terms of, approached Michelle Peckham in the back over here, and approached representative, and approached me. And I, independent of each other. And she says she's an epileptic, and that she's had a couple of instances when she's gone to a state office, when someone's fragrances will trigger epileptic seizures sometimes. So I said, okay, let me research this. So I went to, we have what, 4 legislative researchers. That's one thing we do get to use. So I went to the researchers and I said, okay, what are the states doing in this? And we couldn't find any states. There was one city out in Washington state that was looking at a fragrance bill of some kind of a local ordinance. And that's about it. Well, I was about to say to the constituent that this is going to be an uphill battle. Do you really want to file this legislation? Michelle took the bull by the horns and filed the legislation. And I co-sponsored the legislation with her. At the very least, it gave an airing, no pun intended, to the issue. And it was very interesting, just so you know, that by having my name on that bill, I was contacted by the likes of the CDC and other health organizations from around the country on this. And they say, do you know that the CDC, we don't allow fragrances because they know it does trigger things. So I think it's just one of these things where timing is everything in life. This bill was premature. It was going to be a tough sell. I think Michelle realized it as well. It was going to be a tough sell. It didn't go anywhere, but it's another one of those constituent bills. Now, while I got the floor, let me just tell you about New Hampshire House. Unlike any, and I wrote this in the paper. New Hampshire, no bill can be squashed by the speaker or by a committee chairman. Every bill has to have a hearing on the day on the floor of the House. So these bills do get heard, and that's why it is. And again, it was in the tradition of the House is you listen to your constituents and you file these bills. Most of them come off and they come out of committee unanimous one way or the other. And it doesn't even get debated on the floor. It does make it to the floor in the consent calendar. And it was just one big vote. So that's the story behind the fragrance bill. There was some, it was probably worth the effort to go through and just to get the issue out there. Sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate you explaining that. Did anyone have any other response to that? I mean, it was specific to Pat because he's co-sponsored it, but.
Thanks for being here, Michelle.
I wouldn't vote for it. I didn't vote for it because fragrances are so broad. We're talking about deodorant, we're talking about soap. I mean, anybody could say anything that they're offended by it or it's going to bring it on some medical condition or something. It didn't make any sense. Of the citizen. Also, the fact that it's kind of a unique situation where we don't fund parochial schools at all. And there's a separation of church and state with the First Amendment. This circumvents that entire program where if we gave these vouchers to people, credits, if you will, that they could fund parochial schools with those funds as well. And also, what happens now with the schools? If we're diverting those funds, how are we making up the difference in that money? And if you're giving somebody a business tax credit, again, who's making up the bottom line of where that money's going? If business A is giving their money to somebody, we have to make up the entire amount of money somewhere along the line. We know what the public schools cost, so we have to sustain that.
Joanne, thank you, Tim.
I could afford to send my children to a private school, but not everyone can. So should education opportunities be limited to only those that have means? And I saw this bill as an opportunity to allow that child to get a scholarship or a voucher to go to another school. I don't believe the businesses are going to offer 50 of them. They may offer 1 or 2 of them. So I don't think the numbers are going to be pulled out of the public school system in mass quantities to affect a school budget. So I voted for it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the way the program is supposed to work is that the adequacy payment, if a student, the real rub is that if a student goes to, well, if a student leaves on his own because the parents have the means to send them to St. Thomas or wherever, the school loses that adequacy payment. So the concern was that now we're doing it this way, and that they're going to lose the Atticus Suite payment, but that's how the state made up the money for the lost revenue to the state. It was a 1-for-1. Now, I initially voted against the bill. That's going to sound like Al Gore here. When it first came to committee, because I thought it was taking too much away from the towns. There was a rework of the bill, and it appeared that less was being taken away from the towns. And I changed my mind on this bill. The other thing you got to remember is that someone to be eligible for one of these, in effect, scholarships is, and the scholarship's only $2,000 or $3,000, is that you have to be 3 times above poverty level. So rich kids can't apply to this. And it's, as Joanne said, it really, part of me says, I could afford to send, I did send my kids to St. Thomas. I can afford to do that, but there are people who can't, or to any other private school. And, I saw what happened in Washington, D.C., and a totally different program with the voucher system there. And let me tell you, there were inner city mothers begging, don't take this program away from us. This is the only lifeline we have. Some cities have lotteries for these things, for these programs, and the inner city mothers know that if they win that lottery, their kid has a way out of the inner city. Okay, now we don't have that kind of problem here too much. I mean, we do have some bigger cities than others, but this program in terms of our district, 3 times above poverty, not in Stratham for sure, Northampton probably not, Exeter probably a bit more would be eligible for this, but I didn't see it as a big thing, and I think helping the poor, it's interesting that Democrats like to say they want to help the poor, and it seems like, Republican initiative vouchers. Why is that? And because this is a real way of helping the poor. Because, and believe me, if the public schools are good, we have good schools around here, don't get me wrong. And then part of me says, is this really needed? But obviously there are some parents in some districts in this state that feel that things need to be a little better. I know there's a big controversy in Manchester right now. So again, this had anything to do with the quality of schooling here in this district, but we have to think about the other districts in the state as well. So I did eventually vote for it after I saw that the money that was leaving the district wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be.
I have a couple more questions, and then we'll get to our closing statements. But I had a question for Tim, and definitely want to hear in a rebuttal from Joanne and Pat about, it's my understanding, Tim, that you're working with a few other legislators to try to make something positive come out of a negative situation with this Hep C outbreak at the hospital. And just wondering if you could explain a little bit about what you hope to accomplish with that.
Sure, thank you. Was honored to have Lee Quant call me and ask me to be on that committee, an ad hoc committee, if you will, of present legislators, past legislators, senators, physicians, lawyers. I'm probably missing somebody.
Candlestick makers.
Candles, that was it. I knew it was something. But to answer your question, there's a big hole there. And it's not something that we can fix with the state. It has to be fixed on a national level. So that if New Hampshire creates this rule or law, or registry, if you will, it's not going to work for people that come into the state where there's not other registries. So to answer your question, we're looking to create a registry for all techs and to have a board review disciplinary issues on those techs. This way there's a state database, but we're hoping to create federally as well with Congress and the Senate a national database so that the states will be talking to one another. Because the big issue or the problem seems to be with rules with human resources of not being able to give out adequate information to other employers. All they can say is, yeah, he or she worked here or they didn't work here. So if we had a registry and there was disciplinary issues brought against that individual, and it was on a public registry, then any HR person could look up and see that there is an open case or a substantiated case or an unsubstantiated case or an unfounded case, whatever the case may be. It's a lot more than what we have now, which is nothing. So I thank Rep. Quant for allowing me to be a piece of that, or part of it, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward with some decent legislation that will make sense so that Exeter Hospital fiasco doesn't happen again.
Thank you. Joanne or Pat, did you want to touch on this topic?
No, I think the efforts are definitely to be applauded, and I recognize that the problems with not having a national registry where this puke was allowed to infect people in numerous states. So having a registry would protect that sort of thing with the licensing. And I agree, we've created laws that have protected people so well that an employer cannot divulge much information about any part of a person's, character or work record. Yes, they worked here. Yes, they showed up on time. And it's limited, and it's, this is a tragedy that happened in our next town over.
I want to thank Lee for his efforts in this area. Thank you, Lee. And we're bringing Dr. Chung in, who was I've attended some of the sessions over at Exeter Town Hall and other places over there. With Dr. Chung's been a breath of fresh air in terms of giving hope to patients that are tested positive. If this was a doctor or a nurse that did this, there were boards, and it would have been easily detected beforehand. There are certain professions within the healthcare arena that don't have to be licensed this way. And I agree, Tim. It sounds like it has to be some kind of a national initiative to be able to track it down and to keep the lid on this type of a person. I consult in hospitals, so I know them very well. And the feds came in. This is called a major incident for the feds, for Medicare. And they came in and had a scathing report on Exeter Hospital about their procedures and so forth. I don't know how publicized that was or not.
Yep,
but
we heard about it.
Yeah,
Yes, front page news.
Yeah, okay. Just a missed anything. So, the way it works in the OR or cath lab is they have these things called Pyxis machines, where a nurse or a doctor or an anesthesia person goes in and either reads a few thumbprint or eye or just keying in your code. It knows that you're the nurse taking that narcotic out, and you also indicate which patient that narcotic's going to. The problem what happened at Exeter was that in the cath lab is that it's one thing to take it out, and I've talked to many professionals, and the Joint Commission of Accreditation of Hospitals is very clear about how you're supposed to handle narcotics after you take it out of a machine like that. It's not supposed to be left around just sitting there. And that's what happened at Exeter Hospital. Now, in my experience around the country, this is common. We just can't blame Exeter because everybody trusts each other, and people are busy. They set the narcotic on the tray. That's no excuse for Exeter, but that's what happened. And this tech was pretty proficient in the room, but no one was in. The case was set up and the narcotic sitting there. He just took that drug and took half of it and put the saline in it, and that was that. And in terms of if you look at it, we got to tighten procedures, but the procedures are there to be tightened, and it's up to enforcement of any law or any procedure or any rule. I can go on about that, but I'll let it go with that. But I think any efforts are a positive step in this arena. Thank you.
Questions from the public? Yes, John.
Sapienza again. I find it hard to believe that your pursuit of trying to get some kind of procedures, regulation and procedures in place on a state level and maybe as a federal level, because when someone has a CDL such as myself and they're involved in an accident in town, as I have seen in the past, they immediately have to go to Exeter Hospital and do their thing in the jaw to find out if they have any drugs in them. there's also a procedure whereby a phone call is made. And I remember me getting a phone call from Freddie Hutton one morning and said, John, you've just been selected. I'm picking you up and you're going over to Exeter Hospital and you're going to do your thing in the job. Is this something that's so difficult to accomplish? If it's...
Okay, it's a separate issue. You mean drug testing for the employees?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
across the board, drug testing.
Yeah, there should be some kind of a program. It should be random, some kind, you know. I think with initial employment, they should be tested, absolutely. And then thereafter, there should be some testing that occurs, but in some kind of a random fashion so that, you know, randomness will, you know, not knowing when you're going to be tested is a helpful thing. Just like, it sounds like you.
Yes, I got the phone call one morning and that was it.
And I work for a company that does routine on hire, and then if any kind of a paper cut will trigger, you know, why did you need the Band-Aid, you go see the nurse. So, but it depends on the company you work for.
John, we are doing that. One of our models is the CDL procedure that we're looking at to incorporate into the registry system. And what I declined to, and I'm sorry I left him out, besides the candlestick maker, we had the state union also, still have the state union on our ad hoc committee as well, to give us input on the areas that you're talking about, what we can and can't do with regards to the testing procedure and process, so that they're on board with it as well, because they know what happened at Exeter, and the overall safety of the public. So we're trying to incorporate it all into the ad hoc, and we are looking at the CDL procedure of how they do it, because it's already proved, been tested, and it works, and even all the unions go for it, because some of these guys are union drivers.
Stratham. Mr. Copeland, how do you expect ever to be re-elected wearing such an ugly tie? Mr. Abrami, yours is just as ugly.
You know, can I respond to that? My lady friend gave me this tie. It's beautiful. I get more compliments on this tie than any tie I ever got. I'm telling you, I do. I was in Delta terminally a couple of months ago, and the guys, they compliment my tie. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? There you go.
Anybody else? Jokes or questions? Great. I believe in our opening statements, we started with Pat. If we could start at the other end with Tim and come this way. And just like in the opening statements, you have 5 minutes to close up.
Basically, I'm 56 years old. Some people have questioned how much of a Republican I am. I've been a Republican for 38 years. 38 years, and I'll be probably a Republican for the rest of my life unless there's some type of third party that comes that I find better than what the Republican Party is. My political philosophy is pretty simple. Some people have called it old-fashioned. I strongly believe in working for my constituents. They come first. I mean, that's all there is to it, and they'll always come first. I'm sorry Mary left, because maybe she didn't hear my opening statement. I have done things for Stratham. I enacted in process the mosquito legislation, which is all positive for Stratham and positive for the surrounding communities. What I did want to bring up in my closing argument was there is some flyers going around, and some of you have received them, from a radical group that's out there in Manchester that has Free State Movement connections. And one of the things, it paints a very poor picture of me in that I voted the budget down. Well, yeah, I didn't vote for the budget, and I did vote it down, but I voted it down for reasons I thought were best for my constituents. And some of those reasons were the following. Cuts: Department of Safety, State Police, Detective Bureau. Cut 7 positions in the Cyber Crimes Unit, the Cold Case Squad, Specialty Units. Additionally laying off about 10 troopers. Health and Human Services. Cut all funding for domestic violence programs. Health and Human Services, greatly diminished funding for brain disorder services. Health and Human Services, cut all services for entry-level mental health assessment by mental health professionals. Does that make any sense? We're not evaluating any of these people that think they have issues. We're just going to keep letting them go on the streets. Cut all funding to CHINs, children in need of services. Juvenile offenders that need intervention and guidance so that they don't become adult offenders in our criminal justice system at $35,000 to $40,000 a year. Department of Justice, Consumer Protection Division. Eliminate all 16 Assistant Attorney General positions. Dismantle the division. Consumer Protection, get rid of it. Department of Agriculture, eliminate 3 positions, Inspectors and Weights and Measures Division. So those are the people that go out to make sure that you're paying the proper amount of money on gasoline and other services, to make sure that the scales are proper. No, we're just going to cut that too. Department of Revenue Administration, one of the most overworked administrations. Eliminate 20 auditor positions. Now they're going to get nothing done, and all the towns rely on these people. The State University System of New Hampshire cut $90 million in funding and an additional $11 million in funding from the community college system. Well, guess who's paying for all that now? Our kids, in the tuition costs, up dramatically. None of this made any sense to me. None of it. So I wouldn't vote for it. Overall, with the Democrats and the Republicans, I do play well in the sandbox with others. I can motivate people and move forward in a positive direction, showing them due respect that they deserve, unlike what we've went through the last 2 years in the House. I don't care what party you come from. If you have a problem, then I have a problem, and we'll work together to solve it. And I feel the need to correct some of the radical ideology of the House of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, for the most part, is a reasonable, moderate state, in my opinion. Let's bring back the common sense in the middle of the road so that we can make a difference and move forward with legislation that makes sense for the majority of the people, not radical groups that align themselves with the Republican Party. I will always do what's right for my constituents first and foremost. Please continue to place your faith and confidence in my abilities to deliver you good, reasonable legislation that is fiscally responsible. I've not only done that in the House, I've done that the last 4.5 years here as your selectman. None of your taxes have gone up in the last 4.5 years on the town level. None of you. So I would like to get reelected and continue to do the work that I've been trying to do the last 2 years and hopefully get more accomplished in the next 2 when there's a more evened out House. Thank you.
I too would like to be reelected. I have worked hard over the last 2 years. I think the experience that I've obtained in the, both the Health and Human Services Committee and on the Labor Committee serve as a valuable background for what could be accomplished. I think my experience in healthcare is unique, where I've been hands-on, trying to look at cost-saving methods within the facility that I work in. But one example is when a nursing home destroys medication, the state of New Hampshire requires a pharmacist to come in and assist in that process, where 2 nurses could do it. But so the regulations in New Hampshire say it has to be a pharmacist. So every nursing home in the state has to pay a pharmacist to come in and do a drug audit. So that there are many opportunities working with different groups. Through the Business Coalition, we found legislative opportunities to lower their taxes and to work with the businesses to make it more business friendly. One opportunity that I had that I took the ball and ran on, and it was a fun one for me, was to change the beer definition in the state of New Hampshire. It was archaic. So Red Hook Brewery in Portsmouth expressed a problem they were having. They could not bring beer into the state that they distribute to half the country. So they warehoused it in Massachusetts. When they sold it, the taxes went to Massachusetts. They employed people in Massachusetts, and then they shipped their product from Portsmouth to Massachusetts to put in mixed case lots to distribute back. So when I heard about the problem, I met with the liquor commissioner and learned that the beer definition was archaic, so that if a beer made in Hawaii had palm sugar in it, it was illegal in the state of New Hampshire. So we got the lobbyists, we got legislators all together, the liquor commissioners, and we agreed on a definition of beer. And so effective June, Red Hook has plans to move that warehouse to the state and start distributing beer from here. So when you learn about those kind of opportunities, you can move forward and make it a better place. I believe in the no income tax, no sales tax. I think it provides us with an economic edge. We have a good way of life here, and people are envious when they learn about what we have here. It's a wonderful opportunity serving people. It's an honor to serve people, and I take it very seriously. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, why do you want to re-elect me? Because I think, first off, you want me back on the Ways and Means Committee. I'll be reappointed to the Ways and Means if I'm re-elected. We did an excellent job of revenue projecting, no wishful thinking. We looked at the facts. We took advice from economists and people from the Fed and from real estate industry as to where the economy was going, and we did very honest, accurate revenue projections for the 2-year budget. My goal on Ways and Means is also to keep taxes in check as best we can. The one tax that we're probably going to be looking at next year is the gasoline tax. It's been at 18 cents for the last 20 plus years, and there's a chance that may go up. And it'd be invisible to the public. There's a study committee looking at what to do because of all the efficient cars on the roads, the same amount of miles being driven, but with more efficient cars. So something's going to give somewhere on that one. I do work well with Democrats and Republicans. It's just my nature to work well with everybody. And I do have people in the House that are Democrats that I can certainly say are my friends. But I'll tell you, my friends, the Democrats, I don't want to give the keys back to the fiscal issues to my friends, the Democrats. That's the reason I ran 2 years ago. I saw what was going on in New Hampshire, and the spending that was out of control, and the scrambling to come up with revenue to try to pay for it all. And I mean, no more. I don't want to see the Department of Transportation, the DOT, selling the High Bridge again to the Turnpike Authority and calling that revenue. That's what they did. And it's because the Turnpike Authority can float bonds and pay for that. It's a one-time fix that we're going to be paying for many years. Those kind of things were going on with the last 4 years before we took over. I don't want to see editorials in papers like the Concord Monitor that said that the Democrats balanced their budget on a wing of prayer and a credit card, because that's what they were doing. They were borrowing money, and it sounded too much like New York and Massachusetts and New Jersey and Maine, states that I lived in before. I said, I live in New Hampshire. This is not the way we do business. We don't borrow money and put it on the shoulders of our children. And I want to go back to make sure that doesn't happen. I think you want me there to deal with the Medicaid issues that are coming up, to deal with the EBT card issue that's just raised its head in terms of, I think with automation, there's a way of controlling what is actually being spent with those EBT cards. Risk pool, we didn't talk about risk pool. I was the one on the floor who gave the speech on the floor about the LGC and how out of control the LGC was. And there'll be legislation in front of us next year that we're going to try to rein in the LGC for going forward. As I said before, I'll be fighting any broad-based taxes because I think New Hampshire is unique because of no broad-based taxes, and I can go on and on about that. Again, I want to ensure we live within our means. There's committees looking at regulation in this state, and you can understand the way regulations get, we pass legislation and it goes to other committees to create the rules around the legislation. And some of these rules are not the best. So there are committees right now, we're in the House and the Senate working on these things. And I know some of the stuff's going to be rolling out. We need regulation. We can't let business go unfettered. We can't let the environment go to pot. No. What we're talking about is regulations that are unreasonable, that are really stretches even to the moderate people that might be in the room. Deal with healthcare costs. Our healthcare costs in this state are the highest of any state in the union, and I know because I studied hospitals in every state in the union. We're probably going to have to continue, and we didn't talk about pension reform tonight, but we're going to probably have to look at it and see if another step is needed there. I think, every state's been doing pension reform. New Hampshire was no different. And we have my new poster child is Stockton, California now. You can tell the firemen that they may lose their pensions totally because of they didn't do the proper pension reform. There'll probably be efforts again on the Claremont decisions, and I'd like to be there for that. And I'm also a member of the House Business Coalition, and we do hear businesses about every month or 5 weeks. We hear their concerns and we act on them, just like that Red Hook example that Joanne was involved in. And I just want to be responsive to the citizens of Stratham, and I'd like to continue writing my monthly opinion pieces in the Exeter newsletter,
Well,
which people do read.
We will respond to any letters as long as they don't get us sued. No matter whose views they are, we'll run them.
Oh, okay. And I'd just like, again, once again say it's been an honor to serve you the last 2 years, and hope I can get your vote on Tuesday next week and on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Tim Copeland, Joanne Ward, and Patrick Abrami, our candidates, and thank you